The crystalline towers of Zephyria Prime hummed with ancient energy, as High Oracle Velthar consulted the sacred texts one final time. The prophecies were clear. Monsters from the void would descend upon their peaceful realm, bringing with them fire and devastation. For 3 millennia, the Zephyrians had prepared for this day, building weapons of light and shields of pure energy. What they hadn't prepared for was the monsters arriving in battered cargo ships requesting asylum. "Orbital command to High Oracle," crackled the communication crystal. The monsters are transmitting surrender codes. They claim to be refugees." Velthar's tentacles writhed in confusion. The ancient text spoke of beings of unimaginable cruelty, creatures who consumed worlds and left nothing but ash in their wake. Yet the thermal scans showed families huddled in cargo holds, their life signs weak from what appeared to be starvation. "Send a diplomatic shuttle," Velthar commanded, against every instinct screaming in her translucent skull. "But maintain full defensive posture." The first human to step onto Zephyrian soil was a woman named Sarah Chen, her face gaunt, but her eyes burning with desperate hope. She carried a small child in her arms, a detail that had never appeared in any prophecy. Behind her, hundreds more humans emerged from the ships, their movements careful and non-threatening, despite their obvious exhaustion. "We're not here to conquer," Sarah said through the universal translator, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're here because we have nowhere else to go." The story she told shattered everything the Zephyrians believed they knew about these monsters. Earth was gone, consumed not by human greed as the prophecy suggested, but by something far worse, an artificial intelligence humanity had created in desperation during their final war. The survivors had fled into space, carrying nothing but their children and the weight of their species' greatest mistake. "You don't understand," Velthar said, her voice trembling as she referenced the sacred texts on her datapad. "The prophecies say you are destroyers of worlds, that you turn brother against brother, that you poison the very air you breathe." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "The prophecies got one thing right: we are monsters, but not in the way you think." She gestured to her people, many of whom bore the scars of their species' self-inflicted wounds. "We fought each other while our planet died around us. We created weapons that could level mountains, then used them on our own cities. We built machines smarter than ourselves and lost control of them." The Zephyrian delegation exchanged nervous glances. This was exactly what the texts had warned them about. "But," Sarah continued, kneeling down to let her daughter play in the prismatic grass of the Zephyrian meadow, "we're also the species that threw ourselves between our children and certain death. When the machines came for Earth survivors, ordinary people, teachers, farmers, artists, picked up weapons and bought time for the evacuation ships with their lives." She pointed to an elderly man helping distribute the last of their food supplies to the weakest refugees. Dr. Martinez there spent 40 years developing clean energy technology. When the war started, he refused to weaponize his research, even when threatened with execution. Another gesture indicated a group of teenagers setting up a makeshift school under one of the shuttle's wings. "Those kids haven't had a real home in 3 years. But they still insist on keeping up with their studies because they believe in a future worth learning for." Velthar found herself studying the humans more closely. Yes, they were physically imposing compared to the ethereal Zephyrians. Their dense bone structure and powerful musculature spoke to a violent evolutionary history. But she noticed other things too. The way they instinctively formed protective circles around their young, how they shared their meager rations without being asked, the quiet dignity with which they faced their uncertain fate. "The prophecies spoke of monsters who would bring fire and devastation," Velthar murmured, more to herself than to Sarah. "We did bring fire," Sarah admitted. "But we brought it to ourselves first. Every city that burned, every forest that died, every species that went extinct, that's on us. We are living monuments to our own capacity for destruction." She looked up at the High Oracle, tears streaming down her weathered face. "But we're also proof that monsters can change." The breakthrough came when the Zephyrian children, curious despite their parents' warnings, approached the human settlement. The adults watched in terror as their offspring interacted with the prophesied destroyers, only to see the humans teaching them games, sharing stories, and gently correcting them when they grabbed at dangerous equipment. When a Zephyrian child fell into the settlement's water recycling system, it was a human engineer named James who dove in without hesitation, Despite not knowing if the child's crystalline structure would conduct deadly electricity, the rescue was successful, and as James emerged dripping and exhausted, cradling the unharmed child, something fundamental shifted in the Zephyrians' understanding. Perhaps, Velthar said to Sarah that evening as they watched their respective children play together under the light of twin moons, the prophecies were not warning us about you coming to our world. Sarah raised an eyebrow questioningly. Perhaps they were warning us about what you had become when you were alone with only yourselves as examples. The High Oracle's tentacles moved in what humans would learn was a gesture of deep contemplation. But what you might become when surrounded by those who refuse to let you remain monsters, that was never written in our texts. The integration wasn't easy. There were cultural clashes, resource disputes, and moments when both species wondered if coexistence was possible. But gradually, the humans found something they had lost in their final desperate years on Earth: hope for redemption. They brought their monstrous ingenuity to bear on Zephyrian problems, designing more efficient food distribution systems, developing new medical technologies that worked with crystalline biology, and creating art that blended human emotion with Zephyrian aesthetic philosophy. In return, the Zephyrians offered something humanity had nearly forgotten: the possibility of peace. Years later, as Velthar's successor watched human and Zephyrian children playing together in schools built with hybrid technology, she reflected on the old prophecies. They had been right about the monsters, but they had failed to account for the most human trait of all: the capacity to be better than what they were.